I can see the stream as well.
Okay, so I made a little collection of lists here to get stuff
Awesome.
going. And then you've got
Yeah.
yours as well, and I added my little comment on there, which I think is it's funny. But yeah, so let's get started. The
Oh, oh, you should be able to have edit rights. Do you have edit rights on this doc?
right now it says I'm suggesting. Let me refresh it because I opened it up a bit earlier. Audio.
I gave the
Yep,
Zane Cook Z90.studio edit
yep,
rights.
that's the one. That's there. Cool. Yes.
You can edit, right?
Yep. And I'll
Cool.
definitely add the link to this because I did it in Obsidian because I wanted the graph just in case anybody doesn't know that I'm a network graph evangelist. As you can see by my Discord role on E2B, there's
Cool. Yeah.
let me see. Hey, where am I? Network graph evangelist. Anyway, um, so mainly I was just going through everything, and initially we had this. Whoop, here it is. Notes that I had created earlier with my relatively bad handwriting of getting things set up with the CI/CD to make sure that the SDKs and everything follow the spec whenever we run them and whenever we
Mm-hmm.
change them, and then getting the contribution guidelines and the automation up for that, which that I think is the probably the easiest part because getting a CI/CD set up should work. The only problem was the testing suite that we have wasn't fully. It's not complete, and then the SDKs themselves are also non-compliant with the spec, which was really interesting. So both the Python and the JavaScript SDK that's on the repo right now aren't fully compliant. And if you run the test with them, then you'll see it's mainly because they don't have upload support, or they do but not really. And then there's also some pagination issues and some different things that they're returning for errors. And all that could be fixed, but whenever I was starting to go over the AutoGPT Forge, that was whenever I realized they have a really good implementation of the SDK right now. And I think I talked about this a little bit earlier. So real quick to go over the overview, right? We're going to figure out the current plan for the agent protocol just so that this setup that I had is a bit more clear so that I know where we're going and what we're doing and getting everything nailed down. And
Mm-hmm.
that way there's no more obstacles. There shouldn't be any more obstacles once we decide the path from here. So and then the other thing was to discuss the existing pull requests, which I have a link to it when we get to it. I think there's only one in there now because you closed the other one that was in there. And
Yeah.
then
So let's do one thing at a time. Maybe we can
yes,
first discuss the testing suite, you as the CI/CD process. We're recording the video for our general public who might be interested in our kind of development process. So this is just background information so that everybody can be on the same page, is we are planning for a V1.0 release for September 22nd. And the way that we are currently thinking about this is two steps. One is to make sure that the repo is consistent within itself, meaning that like there's no outdated documentation, you know, uh, code is not buggy, these type of like maintaining process. So CI/CD fits in this category. When we make changes, we want to make sure that it doesn't break our clients who are using the agent protocol. So so this is one category, and the second category is new features. Some of the new features that we're discussing is adding plugins and etc. So this category comes second. For the first iteration for V1.0, we are looking mostly at the health of our repo, and getting the repo in a way that's like really good really easy to use for newcomers as well as just no bugs. Included in this, want to also set up a PR discussion process as well as RFC discussion process. So when new PRs come in, we want to be able to review them, but also not review them in a too slow cadence to prevent people from moving forward quick enough. So these are things that we should also discuss as well. So first order is like CI/CD. So Zaid, you mentioned that the testing suite right now is not complete, as well as the SDK not being compliant with the spec, and therefore we may want to consider using the AutoGPT Forge. I would be just in general curious how hard it is to fix the SDKs so that it's like compliant with the current schema.
As far as fixing the current SDKs, it shouldn't be too difficult. It's just a more tedious process. I think one of the things that would work better now is to sideline the JavaScript SDK so that we can focus on the Python SDK and get that one up to spec before we focus on the JavaScript and TypeScript one, because most agents are built in Python right now. So that I think would make it so that the editing the current SDK would be a lot simpler, and we could get that done before the September 22nd. And then as far as the difficulty of it, from what I saw from the tests, it looked like there was pagination wasn't fully implemented. There was uploads weren't quite the way that they were supposed to be, and then there were some errors that were like if you call and it's supposed to respond with 404, then it's supposed to respond with that and not 500 or something else along those lines. So just some little things to make it compliant. So it shouldn't take too much effort to change it to fit that, but yeah, as long as we focus on just one of them instead of the other one and then keep the other one sidelined for the future, I think that would work well.
So just so I understand, when you say it's not too difficult, is it that like it's a week worth of work, or is it 2 weeks? How what's the scale we're talking about here? But just looking at the Python SDK.
So that one's tough because I started looking at the AutoGPT Forge much more than the one that we had, because once I saw that it wasn't compliant, I started looking at the one that was. But I believe that they have a similar implementation, but they are totally different, actually. So they both use Fast API, so I should be able to compare the two of them and see the implementation and make it a lot faster by doing it that way. But as far as an actual timescale, I'm not 100% sure.
I have a question here. Maybe this is
Probably
crazy.
a week. What's up?
Hi, I'm Nick. I'm a member of the AutoGPT team. Is there a reason we can't just say, and I get this is a conflict of interest a little bit, so keep that in mind. Is there a reason we can't just say, look at this reference implementation for now, while ours is compliant, and then make progress on the other stuff in the background?
Yeah, I think other than the so the reason that we're talking about the SDK is because we want to create a CI/CD pipeline that when new PRs gets posted on GitHub, we can say, oh, like you can't merge this PR because it breaks CI/CD, right? And so as a part of this, we kind of need any like simple agent. And so right now I'm just trying to understand whether we can use the SDK or can we use the Forge. And my concern with the Forge is like what you're saying, a conflict in interest perhaps. So I don't really have any like fundamental worry about using AutoGPT as long as we make it clear that it's just temporary and we're working on a longer term solution.
Yeah, totally.
Also curious to hear. Yeah.
I also think it may be good, and I brought up this position previously, that maybe not continuing our own SDK in general, right? Not having a reference implementation and instead pointing to multiple community implementations may be a better methodology.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how that'll work in the short term. Hey, Ron, we're talking about the Forge and Friends. But I don't know how that ties in with the goals of the foundation overall, right? Like,
I'm a proponent of pointing at community implementations of agent protocol, but I'm just saying, like, with the CI/CD pipeline, it kind of needs to exist. That's my current understanding. Like with any CI/CD, it's kind of a part of the repo itself. And when you have another repo, I'm not sure how like the CI/CD will work. You kind of need to make sure the two repos are in sync, right?
Right.
So
I
that's
guess.
kind of.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. I kind of finished my point.
I think there's a weird delay for us. But I guess I'm not seeing the point of the CI/CD if we don't have the SDK in the system. Does that make sense? So if you remove the SDK, we remove twice as much work. Is that correct?
Yes. I have actually written down in my notes here these 3 plans. Plan A, AutoGPT Forge. Plan B, building automagically with the Open API server generator. And then plan Selene and Lean, removing any SDKs and keeping only the spec and potentially any instructional material. And the idea with these was, one, we could sort of trim down some of the AutoGPT Forge and implement it in the agent protocol repository, so that we could have something there as an implementation, but we would be just taking that code and removing the AutoGPT name on it and putting a little thing that says created by AutoGPT. But that could come up as an issue we were talking about with AutoGPT competitor agents might not like something that was built by AutoGPT, something along those lines. But I don't know where that fits in or not, but it's definitely an option. The other one was building it automatically with the Open API generators. And whenever I did that, I had some issues with it because the fast API generators in beta did not actually start. And then the Flask version wasn't at all passing the test that we have. And so that doesn't seem like that big of an option unless we do that along with changing some things. I'm sure there's a more advanced way to do that. And then there's the clean and lean option where we remove any SDK and only link off to other SDKs, where that would just get rid of any of the maintain aspect of the agent protocol repositories in general, until we get another thing going where we have our own implementation. So we would just be linking off to AutoGPT Forge. This overall best plan, by my opinion, I think what we should do is structure the agent protocol so that it's just like the repository is just the spec, and separate it between the spec and the RFC and the documentation site. Instead of having it all be in one mono repo, it should all be in separate repos for each one. And then remove the existing non-compliant SDKs, or at least put them into an archive in the back burner so that we have them for the future. And then follow a similar structure to what GraphQL does as far as our repo structure goes, in the way that they set things up. And I have that link here where I took a screenshot of their GitHub repo page that I sent to Sasha earlier, where they have their spec, and then they've got their JavaScript implementation, which I think is their most popular. I'm pretty sure they have other implementations in here too. And they say reference implementation because it's not the one. I think Apollo is the greater one for GraphQL, so that's a bigger one that people usually use. And then also, whenever we do a list, we could have it be this GraphQL type thing where we have this, this is the reference implementation, and then these are the third-party ones where these might work out better than the reference. It's just, the reference is there just in case you need it. It's functional, and that sort of thing could work. But that was kind of my thought process on that, and I think it covers everybody's bases for what I've heard about where to go. So
Yeah, so
I
the GraphQL, when you look at GraphQL, OAuth, and all that, they're more like protocol in the agnostic way of thinking. My thought on that. I think basically what's gonna happen is, if you do that, you have an agent protocol and then multiple implementations of it. It's like, yes, it makes your life easy in a way, but what's gonna happen is people are not sure where to go. They don't know where to go. They don't know how to implement the protocol, and they don't know. They don't even have a testing suite that's opinionated. That's what I'm trying to push to you, Sasha. That you try to have a testing suite that's very opinionated about what the workflow is. Because if we're just doing a schema check, I think it's not enough. So what GraphQL and others do, okay, that's an example. I would like to suggest us to go further and just actually having a testing suite that proves that your software works. Because OAuth and GraphQL is like a bunch of graphs and a bunch of text that tells you exactly how you should do the thing. There is literally no test. There is no programmatic way to say, yeah, you're working. I need to check GraphQL. Maybe they have something, but the simple fact that you have multiple implementations of GraphQL, I hate it. I hate that. I don't understand why people do that. Can we do something different?
So the one thing about that is that I didn't want to force people into a specific category for agents, because an agent shouldn't be a generalized agent. There should be specific agents. One agent could be purely for music generation, so it wouldn't have the ability to write a text file, or one could be specifically for doing research, and it wouldn't have, it would interface with something specific. It would be up to the third party libraries, the frameworks that people are using, to describe how theirs is different and what it's for. And then
Yeah, but so details matter. I'm sorry, I'm going to take one of your example and actually go and look at it. The music generation, what's the output?
like a WAV file or an MP3, an audio file.
Yeah, so you need to write a file.
Right, but not just a file. It would be a music file, and it would take a specific input, and it would be using a specific, system. It's not just writing to a file, I guess. And so that's the kind of thing, is if you set up this agent to, I guess, have, like you're saying, have access to writing to a file. I get what you're saying. I think where it should then be able to use that tool, write to file, and put that data on there. But that's not necessarily the case, because in the instance of WAV files, you're probably not writing in the same way that you're writing text, because you would be opening the file in, decimal, ASCII mode, and then you would be writing to that instead of in binary format or base 64. So there's
Yeah, but that's what's beautiful, is that we don't care about how it's being written. The client looks at the file and opens it, and he opens it the same way it opens every file. I mean, we could make differences because getting videos is probably going to be different than files, etc. But what I'm getting at is that I'm okay with uploading artifacts being optional. I'm okay with that. You could say, yeah, you know what? Actually, I have an agent. It's just a chat. Okay, that's a form of agent. But what I don't understand is why you would, if you support an endpoint, an upload endpoint, you should support it exactly the way the agent protocol asks you to support it. There shouldn't be multiple ways to do the thing. We're just going to make. I'm more of an Apple guy than a Linux guy, and that's weird. I know we're working on, but right, you give a lot of options to people. You're not opinionated. They're gonna struggle. They're gonna. And
So
the Apple protocol
yeah,
will emerge, and will emerge for sure. The question is it us or not? You see what I mean? Apollo is a great GraphQL
I see what you mean.
implementation.
Sasha, what were you gonna say?
I want to take a step back and talk about the role of the SDK. So there are two sides that I'm hearing. One is it's a reference implementation. That's one role the SDK can play, and the other role is using SDK for CI/CD. And I think let's talk about baseline, right? Like baseline, what we wanted for the agent protocol is for it to be as neutral as possible, as non-biased as possible. So that means it's literally just a set of endpoint and schema. So we want to have anybody to be able to use it. That means we will eventually further down the line support GraphQL, support sockets, and additional projects that are built on top of it. For example, AutoGPT Forge is kind of a good reference implementation of, you can use the Forge and then the agent protocol comes out, free from the box. And my current question, which I can spend some time this week to investigate, is whether the SDK is ready to be used in CI/CD, and if it's not ready, then how much work is it to be used for CI/CD for agent protocol in the repo. And I agree with Wayne that the having some sort of check testing suite, just so Wayne is talking about not just on the schema, but also on validating if the agent works. I personally think that that's like a good to have a second step, and then we should get to the first step first, which is validating the agent schema. And then once we get there, we can discuss the second step. And let's do like one step at a time rather than like, biting off too big of a sandwich, that we don't have the resources to kind of like go there yet. So that's my thoughts, right? Like my conclusion is that maybe this week I'm gonna spend some time looking into how far off the SDK is, and in terms of Zane's proposal for the ABC, Plan A, Plan B, Plan C, I think what he's suggesting, Plan C, sounds really reasonable, which is perhaps. Let's do Plan C if we after I do a deep dive onto the SDK, and if the SDK doesn't work, then we should just remove it and then create another agent for the CI/CD. But if the SDK works, then let's just repurpose the SDK as a CI/CD tool rather than a reference implementation. We can use AutoGPT Forge and other projects for reference implementation.
What does it mean to use the SDK as a CI/CD tool?
So it's like by that I just mean like creating kind of checking against the endpoint and schema, making sure that it fits. It's kind of like a reference implementation of an agent that basically makes the endpoint calls.
So in my head, I make a distinction between two things: clients and servers, right?
Right.
And so a testing suite is nothing more than a client that asks a server, hey, I want to do this. Can you do it? Da, 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 da. It's an interaction. It doesn't care about what the server is. And I'm really focused on that client. I really don't care about the server. I'm saying I want this client to be opinionated. I want this client to be, yes, following the protocol and the schema, but more than that, it needs to be a client that's very demanding on what the server is. What that means is the testing suite cannot just say, oh, you gave me back a task. Okay, that looks good. That follows the schema. No, it says, you gave me a task. That's 1, 2, 3. Okay, let me try to get that task, please. You see? And so I want our CI/CD tool to be as opinionated as possible, but I want the reference implementations of agents to be as we don't care as possible, meaning like it's just a box. You can do, right?
I want two. I want one that's not biased and not opinionated, and then one that is very opinionated. And that way you can get one that's going and then one that's not. You know what I mean? Together.
Yeah,
Okay,
so I have a fundamental counterpoint here. Based off the discussions I'm hearing, we're trying to keep our scope small, and we are trying to provide an implementation that is unopinionated. Should we provide a reference implementation at all, right? Rather than saying, hey, go look at the community stuff.
Yeah.
And also, should we provide CI/CD, right? Those are both a huge amount of work to take on. When I don't know if they're actually aligned with what we're trying to like do based off the goals we've discussed here.
Funny enough,
CI/CD
I included
work
you
with.
in my thing here. Let me find you here. It was criticism of generator usage because that's what you were talking about. And I didn't know your name at the time, Nick. But the idea here of using this generator or an SDK or an SDK in general makes sense, and that factors in heavily to the Plan C that I talked about, where we scrap the idea of the generator for now or the SDK for now, and then get it going to where we actually have more informational material, more, like a video that describes what the project is, what the spec is, and all that kind of stuff, rather than having an SDK as a reference implementation, because GraphQL has a reference implementation, but it's not necessary. Although it might be for Apollo. I'm not 100% on that. But could
Right.
be longer form than we want, for all of the edge cases that are out there.
Right. And if you look at something like the IETF or the engineering internet task force, basically, they don't provide reference implementations, right? It's
Right.
here's your spec, comply to it. Good luck. Right. Like that is a valid position to take as a foundation. Right. And I
Yes.
agree that long term that it's a good idea to validate all these things. But while we're founding it, it's a lot of effort, right?
Okay, Nick, I have a question for you. You mentioned two things, a reference agent implementation and a reference CI/CD tool. CI/CD in my head is like testing suite. Let's just put it.
Yeah.
So client, web server. We're having this conversation between client and web server. The protocol defines a web server. There is no web server without client. And so, question for you. How can we live without a testing suite?
You tell people the spec and tell them to comply to it. Right. It's a spec, not a contractor obligation, right? Like theoretically, they
Do
don't.
you know, how can you guide them? How can you guide them
So
into compliance?
this was actually where I think the CLI tool would fit in a bit better as an option for that, because being able to inspect the agent through a tool, whether or not it's a CLI, doesn't matter. It's just whether or not there is a tool. I think if you could, if we built a tool for viewing the thing and going through it, just checking, tasks, and then create task, and then steps, and create step, view the artifacts, upload artifact, to being able to do all of that within our own client would also at the same time check the spec within that as well. And then
Yeah.
it also should allow for bridging with like future plugins that we've been talking about, or extensions to the spec that could make things more complicated as well than just checking against an open API specification file.
Yeah, I think that's a lot more in line with how generally stuff like this works, where it's tools around your protocols and such to validate them rather than to CI/CD check them, right? For example, the CI/CD in and of itself is kind of weird, in my opinion. If I were to make that, I'd make it actually an action on GitHub that runs against your own agent, not against our reference agent,
Mhm.
right? And that would be
Oh,
done with a tool like the CLI.
The CI/CD tool can work against any agent.
Mhm.
It's a
Right.
client.
Right, but you should publish it as a GitHub action, right?
Yeah, okay, why not? It's a good next step. I agree. The first easy next step is to just give a one-line command that people run, and that checks whether the agent complies. By the way, Ziggy, it's already there. This CLI tool that you mentioned, it's literally this thing, except that it's automated. Like,
Is that the
see here? This is the forge running here. And then, I mean, you already know that,
Oh, you're
you
sure.
know, we have this little tool in my screen.
It's not loading for me.
Yeah, it has this weird Discord thing. There we go. You hear me?
I hear you.
Yeah. See, boom, shook. And you see this? So
No.
it is not. You still don't see it.
No, it's invisible.
Is this the one that that Alan created?
Yeah.
So the problem with the one that Alan created was we had the two tests in there. One was the opinionated test that you had manually created, and the other was the one that went over the open API spec. And so in an effort to make it less opinionated, I removed that first one. That's what that PR request was before. But the problem with that is that now it doesn't have any post requests at all. So we're only checking GET requests with IDs that are from the OpenAPI example values. So it'll check, /tasks/ID, and I have that actually over here prepared right here, where the OpenAPI spec here has agent task ID, and then the example 1D all the way to 981. And that's what it's getting over here. And then this is actually, I think this was running on the JavaScript version, so it returned to 500, even though it's supposed to turn to 404, which is something that could be fixed in the future. But the
Zane, I cannot hear you anymore. I think your audio source was switched
Yeah,
to a
your
different
audio-
source.
oh,
It's back.
Oh, okay, it's back. It's back. Yeah.
what happened?
You're having fun with Linux, is what it sounds like.
It's possible. Let me double check real quick. Just my yeah, should be the right one. Check 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 1 2 1 2 3.
Yeah, you're good. We heard up to where you highlighted the ID in the right
Right
hand
here.
panel.
So the ID, this example ID 1D to 981, that's what it's getting over here in the thing, and it's also this test is how I found out that it wasn't compliant on these 404 errors because that's supposed to be a 404 instead of a 500, and but that's also separate from the testing suite, which is not posting this request and getting it. Which so if we did that, then we would only be testing against this specific route, which would always be a 404 error or something else. And so, that's if we were testing the compliance of an agent, um, then we would only really be testing whether or not they set up this route to 404, which isn't a full compliance test. And I think
Exactly. Yeah.
that's
I
one
need
of
to
the
fix that. Yeah, it was working a few days ago. It's a shame.
Well,
I'll
so
try.
I saw posts from the other one, but in all of the video that you sent me, I didn't see for the contract test any. It had the same number of requests and it didn't have any posts or anything like that. So I don't think that contract test had any posts in it from the beginning, but the other one did. So we could go back to the other one, but it was more opinionated because the task was write Washington to a text file, which also, since we're aiming up for September 12th here or September 22nd here, 10 days from now, for the hackathon, and the hackathon is supposed to be a generalized agent hackathon, we could put that back in there, and that wouldn't be that big of an issue because the whole point was, what I was talking about before of well, what if the agent is specific and doesn't have the ability to write to a file, or something along those lines. But if especially for this hackathon, that might not be the case, and we could use that tool, no issue, because it works
It's
great.
okay. Let's stick to the plan. Let's stick to the plan with like the less opinionated one. I'm okay with it. I'm just gonna ask Alan to see this contract. It was making post very quickly,
Okay.
very easily. Yeah, hopefully Alan can help us on that. There's like a little issue. If I can spend more time, it's worth it also for us because we're saying right now that the force complies. Maybe it doesn't.
True. Yeah, it might not. I think that your other test too could have made it more clear whether or not it was or not. But yeah, it's definitely something to look out for. So
Okay, so it sounds to me like we need a little bit more customizability in this tool. Seeing as how we're building this from the CLI, could that not be a parameter in the CLI?
what do you mean?
Parameter.
Right. We're talking about this a way to verify agents, right? The proposal was to use a CLI, right, or some other tool to verify this. But we're having a problem with trying to do so with like post requests because we don't know what some of these things are shaped like because they're not necessarily defined or capabilities that are supported like explicitly.
Well, no, they are defined in the Open API spec, but they are not being tested in the testing suite currently, and that's what the issue is.
Technical issue. You can do it. You can fake a request as long as it follows the format, and then
Right.
back a response. Just
Right, but
secure.
we don't know what valid requests are. Right.
Sorry.
We don't know what like an example valid request is. For example, the music bot, right, asking it to write to a file. Like the word Washington isn't a valid request for it.
Oh, okay. So here it's the different type of validation. Usually, when we talk about validation in REST API, it's just like the shape of the data and its types. But you're
Right.
right. What you put within the request could also be validated. I think this one typically would be outside of the scope.
Right. Um, so what I was proposing is you can control the input as part of the like, CLI or whatever uh, CI, and it's like, hey, here's your input for this step. Here's what we expect our output to be. And that way we can validate in CI still, and all it is a parameter for your like your GitHub action or your CLI or whatever to say yes, this works or no, this doesn't.
Yes, I get what you're saying now. Let's say we created a dummy agent that was a reference implementation for us, and it did have the capability to write to a file. Then in our CI/CD to validate it, we would say this is the parameter that you use to validate it. You say write Washington to a file, whereas a music generator bot, or agent would you would put in a prompt that says, create some lo-fi music, make me feel like 80s synth pop or something like that.
Not I
And
or not wave exactly,
yeah,
and it checks if the file exists.
and that
Right.
could work. We could probably pass that as a parameter to a pre-existing route in the testing suite to make it so that it's anything instead of something that has a bias. It's a parameter that you're giving that. And if we turned it into an image that's available with the GitHub Actions, where you're using that kind of thing that you were saying earlier, then it would be a parameter to the image for the GitHub Actions, and that makes sense.
And it would just read it from the environment or whatever from your CI, and it's configurable. Yep.
So if I'm understanding correctly, we are writing a CLI tool that's basically checking for it's an implementation that allows other agent developers to check if their agent is compliant to the protocol, and we're providing a reference implementation on what a example CI/CD pipeline would look like, and then encouraging people to use rather than having a sample agent in the repo and sample CI/CD in the repo. We're essentially creating examples for other agent developers.
Yes. That also may end up working into the idea that somebody had before of creating an agent file that would describe some certain things for the agent. If we were to standardize something like that, then that could also be used in that workflow. But that's not something that we have in there right now. So we could make it manual for now, and then later on work something else in.
Okay,
So does this
I'm starting to
yeah.
buy very highly the GitHub Action thing. I think it's pretty smart, Nick. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty cool, and you can even put a parameter of what type of task you want, so that you can have a generalist agent task where you write a file. You can have a different eval, like they're just eval basically at this point. It's literally, or we do this actually in AG Benchmark. If you want, you can use AG Benchmark to power this GitHub Action, because we literally have tasks that are pretty unopinionated, right? They just follow the protocol, literally. They just ask you to do something. So if you want to use AG Benchmark to power this GitHub Action, you're free. Also, you can also create action specific on the protocol without using AG Benchmark.
Yep. And then on the agent protocol site, we would just be linking to those third-party tools as examples of things that we could use, and that would work well, I think.
So
I just want to say
Um,
something because I got off the bus. I really like this CICD idea, but maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe at the start it can be tied to GitHub Actions, but it seems like to me it's just testing HTTP requests. So even that could be its own repo that you connect with Jenkins or Actions or whatever you're gonna use. Yeah. Especially if you're not going to use create a reference implementation, like basically having tests is kind of equivalent to running a reference implementation if nobody used the reference implementation.
And making those tests as clear and descriptive as possible whenever something is wrong. So
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Thanks for the input. I think everybody should have access to the meeting notes. I'll paste it in this chat also. And it seems like we've arrived at a conclusion. And Zane, does it seem feasible to for a V1.0 release that's September 22nd to get that kind of in order, or is that kind of a long term?
it should be.
More of a long term.
It should be something relatively easy to get done by the end of this week if it's all just setting up a GitHub action that takes a parameter and then using it to test against a workflow where you run your agent. The only thing that we would need is an agent to run, which we were talking about doing for the educational video that talks about the agent protocol, because I think that makes sense.
Yeah, do you wanna kind of discuss that?
Yeah, so the idea was to get a video made where we explain the agent protocol with some kind of infographic kind of thing, and then we use an agent to create something within the video, explain that process, and explain, along with the infographic what it's doing, so that we, doesn't matter what it is, if it's writing to a file or creating code or anything, it doesn't matter what kind of agent it is at the end of the day. But the point is to visualize the format so that people can understand a little bit easier, because there currently is no video explaining it. And everybody that I've talked to, I've kind of had to go through a schema and show them what that is, or draw it out on like my tablet and show it to him. It's like, here's the hierarchy: agent, tasks, steps, artifacts. And it's really simple as far as specifications go, so it shouldn't be difficult to do that. It could even be a really short 3 or 4 minute video, and I think that would work out well. But building an agent for that video and then linking to that agent within the video, or in the description of that video, I think makes the most sense, so that people can get an exact, here's an example, even if it's just the most basic agent that exists, as long as it's got an input and an output, that's all we need.
The tests provide that as well, because like if you just read, like in most software, I'll go straight to the tests and I'll be like, okay, here's how I use the software. I mean, I know videos are really good for like people who have no idea where to start,
Right.
but you know,
Yeah, because I feel like the developer experience for getting the hackathon going is probably the most important step for getting the agent
Yeah.
protocol in place. And so just making it as easy as possible. So in the video, it's probably going to have to talk about that CI/CD, or at least the testing suite to some extent, and then have all that information available on a repository for that example. That way people can see it.
I would say too, like the
Um,
tests themselves should be like have good documentation, so that if I want to learn how agent protocol works, I can just look at the tests and say, okay, here's how the tasks work. Okay, because the documentation says this, it expects that. That would be very nice, I think, for hackathon. I mean, it's in a week, so
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
What was that? I think you cut out in the
So
last part.
Oh.
Maybe not. He's gone.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
What's up?
I like the video idea. I think I agree with I don't know who that was, but I agree with the general idea that by the end of this week, when we do the CLI, we can record a video afterwards, kind of explaining, telling people how to onboard. I think you were discussing you writing the example agent that creates the video. I feel like that's maybe like good to have, not necessarily.
It's
Maybe I don't know how.
Creating the video would be pretty difficult, I think, but just creating something in the video, if it like the music thing that I was talking about, or even an image, if it was an agent that called Stable Diffusion, or created a prompt and then called Stable Diffusion, or something along those lines, something simple, something quick to the point and easy for other people to implement, so that
Yeah, so such an agent would be a example, like reference agent, and so I feel like that maybe is a hackathon project. If anyone here wants to collaborate with Zane on this, I'm sure.
It kind of is.
You can.
I've been told by my friends that it's almost like I'm doing the hackathon before the hackathon, so it's kind of
Yeah.
fun. But yeah, I think it'll be good to get something like that going. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as it's simple, straightforward, to the point. Just shows, here's how it functions. The video needs to explain that in a graphical way, in a visual way, and then yeah, make sure that the links are good and that the documentation fits. So.
Awesome. Outside of that, I think I'm gonna start a chat thread in the Agent Protocol channel on the current outstanding pull requests as well as issues. I closed one, and I think we should just out of health, repo health wise, we should kind of keep an eye out and close any outstanding PRs and and issues and at least respond to the RFC. So I'll start a thread and for us to all discuss. And then just so that everyone know that we're recording these sessions for posting on YouTube. So we want to kind of keep an open process. Anyone can comment and hear how we make decisions. So if you're not comfortable, just let me know. I think I don't have anything else. Zane, do you have anything else that you want to share?
Well, the other thing was to go through the RFC and the spec and make sure that, well, you had something in there for going up on the RFC discussion. I don't think we talked about the RFC very much. My questions for that was just, does it include any potential biases towards any form of agent? Does it make sense to a newcomer with instructional material, which is hard to gauge, I guess? And then does the RFC comply with the spec or vice versa? And that was the only thing, but
Right now, the RFC process is really just people submit ideas on the GitHub issues. And I've been kind of like going through them to answer questions. And if I closed one RFC today, someone was asking about the human readable form. They think that agent protocol should be human readable rather than REST API. And so I kind of like dived down into their explanation and things. And I gave a response. And I'm happy to share more details in the agent protocol. I noticed that we already talked for about an hour, so maybe it's good some of the discussion items can remain.
yeah, I noticed a bunch of people left already, so I'm not sure what's it must have been long enough. The if we make a issue for that, and also if we're separating the repositories out, then that's also something that would be good, because we can keep the spec and the open API schema in one repository by itself, and then move the RFC into another one, and then we could have pull requests specific to the RFC, so that we're splitting things up. That could work better than like, you know, the monorepo. But yeah, that's
okay. Let's discuss this. I can see pros and cons here, so perhaps let's do the deliberation offline in the agent protocol channel.
okay.
Cool.
Sounds good.
And then we can also schedule a meeting for next week. My plan is to do these weekly. And so thanks everyone for the contribution to the discussion. It's really productive. So thank you, Zane, for coming up with chat with you guys next week and on Discord.
Yep. See you next week. Well, I'll see you sooner than that probably, but thanks for coming,
Yeah.
everybody. It was nice talking to everybody that talked. Have a fantastic.
Thanks, y'all. I really appreciate your time.
You too.
Yeah, thanks. This is great. Yeah.
All right. Bye.